I was looking for a lifeline, someone to hold on to, something I thought was true, so tell the truth. But I can't let you go, and maybe you found someone. I'm better off alone. Something better came along, but I can't let you go. But I can't let you go. But I can't let you go. And maybe you found someone. I'm better off alone. Something better came along. Maybe I was wrong for the first time, and maybe this was all just in my mind. We'll rise and fall and start again. God knows when we'll reach the end, and every single thing might fall apart. But I can't let you go, and maybe you found someone. I'm better off alone. Something better came along, but I can't let you go. But I can't let you go. But I can't let you go. But maybe you found someone. I'm better off alone. Something better came along, but I can't let you go.
Hello everyone, welcome to class today. I've got some stuff to talk to you about in regard to all of the stuff that we're going to be talking about this week, which you can see our objectives there up on the screen. We'll get into that in just a second. Before I get into all of that, I've got a few announcements and a few things to say before I get into the content, I guess you could say, for this week. First of all, I'm really looking forward to going through all of your midterm projects and your midterm exams. I'm sure you all did a great job. I hope you all enjoyed the midterm project, kind of getting a little bit of free reign to explore and experiment and install your own virtual machines with your own operating systems and your own virtual appliances. And maybe try something new if you're not used to making screen recordings. I know that was a little different from what you're accustomed to, especially for this class. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of that and grading all of those this week. A couple announcements right off the jump. October 28th is going to be our IT department advising day. That's going to be at 10:30 a.m. I'm going to post an announcement in the Blackboard a little later on in the week with all the details and all the fun stuff. But October 28th at 10:30 a.m., that's our advising day. I'd like for you all to try to attend if at all possible. I know not all of you can attend. I know some of you work and have other situations that would prevent you from being here. But if at all possible, I would like for you to try to attend the advising day, because I know a lot of you are entering your final semester, and it's just as important for those of you who are entering your final semester as it is for those of you who are just getting started. So, we're trying to get all the paperwork done, all that last advising done. Basically a one-stop shop to get you ready for the spring. We'll do graduation applications, we'll do registration, we'll do all that kind of fun stuff. All right there at our advising day. So again, if at all possible, if you can make it. If you can't make it, again, I understand. But if you can make it, please try to be there. Also, I wanted to elaborate a little further, since we are getting ready to start talking about VMware Workstation Pro. I wanted to elaborate a little further about part of the announcement that I posted in the Blackboard class this week, talking about how the latest Windows update causes some older versions of VMware Workstation Pro to stop working. So this was more intended to be like a don't worry about it announcement. But I know that it's kind of hard to convey that sort of thing in text, so I wanted to make the announcement here as well. More or less, some older versions of VMware Workstation Pro, specifically versions 12 and 14, are incompatible with the latest Windows update. However, if you follow the instructions in the module and you get the version of VMware that is available to you all, it is the latest version of VMware Workstation Pro. It's VMware Workstation Pro 15. And from all accounts, from everything that I can tell, VMware Workstation Pro 15, especially the most recent updates to VMware Workstation Pro 15, should be just fine with the latest updates to Microsoft Windows. So I just wanted to make sure that if any of you saw any of these articles looming about out there, that you didn't get the wrong impression, that you just had your mind put at ease. Everything should work okay. So this week we're going a little bit out of order from what we're doing in the online class. We're kind of going, kind of flip-flopping the modules just a little bit, but remember that the live streams go in a bit of a different order, do a little bit of their own thing as compared to what we do in the Blackboard. And we're talking about loading Microsoft Windows into a virtual machine, which in the current module in the Blackboard class, you're installing, you're getting acquainted with the VMware Workstation Pro hypervisor by installing Linux into a virtual machine. But in the next module, the one after the current module, you'll be working with Windows. So, let's go ahead and get a jump start on it. And next week, we'll be talking about installing Linux in a VMware Workstation virtual machine. So we've got our stream objectives up here. We're going to understand the steps to load Microsoft Windows into a virtual machine, which is fairly simple. We're going to understand the steps needed to install VMware tools in a Windows virtual machine. We're going to examine some virtual machine configuration options. And we're going to examine some optimizations for a Windows virtual machine. So, a Windows operating system can really be loaded into a virtual machine in a number of ways. We've kind of seen as we've been playing with things that, through the process of creating a virtual machine, sometimes we're given these different options of different operating systems that, we're going to install. Like when you used the VirtualBox, it asked you, what type of operating system is it that you're going to install on this machine? And you chose Linux. And it'd even let you choose a subcategory of Linux, like Arch Linux. And so we have these kind of templates that VMware Workstation offers us that's kind of similar to that. We get these templates that are virtual machines that already contain an operating system and often already are loaded with application software, and they're pre-built VMs that are stored in a non-executable state. And we can make clones and copies of those, and we can use those basically however we want to use them. And when we do that, we basically have an automated way of creating a virtual machine. That's something that VMware Workstation allows us to do. In our module later on, we're going to be installing Windows from scratch. And really, when we're installing Windows onto a virtual machine, the process of installing Windows onto a virtual machine is just the same as you would go through installing Windows on a host, just like a regular computer or a server. And, you choose your boot device, which in this case is going to be your ISO file. And then you have, in the module, I was going to give you a step-by-step guide of how I was going to give you a step-by-step walkthrough of installing Windows. But then I thought, that's pretty silly. I don't know why I'd give these guys a step-by-step walkthrough of how to install Windows. They've all installed Windows before. You know, they've all taken operating system courses. They've all installed operating systems at this point. They all know how to install Windows. I'm not going to give these guys a step-by-step installation guide of how to install Windows. They should know how to do it by now. So in this module, you know, that we have coming up, I walk you through how to set up the virtual machine. But then when it comes time to install Windows, I say, well, you're installing Windows. You should know how to do it. And I kind of leave you on your own. You know, because there are several different ways that we install Windows. You know, it's not just one installation path that gets you from beginning to end. There are several different ways, and it is just like installing it on a host. So we're really not going to worry about one specific way of installing an operating system. There really is no right way to do it. Every way that you could do it is just as right as every other way. And, you know, you as a technician are going to choose the path that's, you know, best for you, that works for you. So when we get to that point, I want you to think back to this point where you are right now, watching this video. And remember, like, oh yeah, he did tell us that. He told us that, you know, when we got to this point, we're going to have to figure out how to install Windows on our own. That, you know, we all have our own kind of path that works for us in terms of how we're going to install Windows. So that's what we're going to need to do. But I have complete faith that every single one of you will be able to install Windows with absolutely no problem. You know, sometimes you get some quirks with a virtual machine, and really VMware Workstation Pro is a very quirky hypervisor in my experience. I know one of the issues that I have with it personally is that there's a file, there's one of the process files that'll get hung that I won't be able to kill, and I'll have to do a cold boot of my host in order to kill the process, because it just gets hung there. I've looked for like solutions online, can't find a good one, tried different things, can't figure it out. You might run into the same thing. And if you can figure out a solution that I haven't done, let me know, because I'm trying to figure it out myself. Because I've had to cold boot my machine several times while making the videos for you guys for the modules, because one of the VMware Workstation processes got hung up in there and stopped everything from working. Real weird. So it's not necessarily my favorite, but it is an industry standard and something that you need to work with. So we kind of got to try it out. Maybe it's just the architecture of my system that's causing me a bit of a problem. So your mileage may vary. You may never have a problem. One of the things that VMware Workstation does have that the Oracle VirtualBox didn't have was VMware Tools. So after you install your operating system, one of the things that you want to do is you want to install VMware Tools. And I'm not sure if I discussed that in the module or not. VMware Tools is an optional step It's not really necessary that you do it, but it is kind of helpful if you do it at times. VMware tools are a combination of device drivers and processes that enhance the user experience with the VM, improve VM performance, and help manage the virtual machine. Again, it's not mandatory, but it is highly recommended. In any of the VMware workstation or VMware vSphere, any of the VMware environments, you kind of want to install those VMware tools, even though they're not mandatory. And they're really simple to install, which is probably why I didn't really talk about it, although I probably should have. And sometimes, depending on the situation, they might install automatically. But if they don't install automatically, all you do is you select your virtual machine from the menu. You just right-click on that virtual machine. And there'll be a little option in there that gives you another option to where you can install and download VMware tools. You can also do it from inside of the virtual machine. And it'll kind of update it like it's software updates. So it's there's several ways to do it. There's documentation online. Probably the easiest way to go about it. Installing those VMware tools onto your virtual machine. So at that point, you have a working VM. And we want to take a minute to talk kind of about the virtual hardware that you kind of need for your Windows virtual machine. Ideally, you want to allocate the minimum system requirements, or a little bit over the minimum system requirements, for the Windows operating system of choice. We're using Windows 10, which, you can get Windows 10 through the Azure for Students, which there's a video in the next module, about how to get the download and get all the like the key and all that kind of fun stuff. But as we've talked about, the installer can only see what's been allocated to the virtual machine. That's the hypervisor's doing. The hypervisor's doing all the management of the virtual resources, so that installer can only see what the hypervisor allows it to see. A 30 gigabyte disk and 2 gigabyte memory is what I recommend if you're able to do it. Minimum requirements are 1 gigabyte of RAM and 16 to 20 gigabyte of hard drive space. 16 for 32 bit and 20 for 64 bit. But you can bump that up a little bit. 30 gigabyte for the hard drive and 2 gigabyte for the memory. Pretty good base requirements. Does the job fairly well. There are virtual machine specific drivers that have to do with our VMware workstation. They communicate with the hypervisor. So as we've talked about before, the hypervisor kind of fools the operating system. So these virtual machine specific drivers in Windows communicate with the hyperdrivers, but they are Windows drivers. So when we're looking at that, one of the things to consider Let me look in my notes here, make sure I'm covering everything. Yeah, so with your virtual drivers, your virtual machine specific drivers, you'll see, like when you go to look at like the device manager, let's say, like you'll see parts that are obvious, that make it obvious that the computer is a virtual machine. And they'll say that the computer was manufactured by VMware. And if you've worked on our NetLab system, those are virtualized systems, and when you do some of the stuff there that you've done in NetLabs, it'll tell you like, oh, this part was made by VMware. Well, the part wasn't really made by VMware. There's not really a VMware made part, a physical part, in that. In actuality, what it's referring to there is the virtual driver that's being applied to the virtualized part. So it kind of makes it look like, things were made by VMware and all that kind of stuff, when, there's no VMware parts, just virtual parts with a VMware driver. And that's baked into Windows. This image here that we have here is just to show you about how the again, it's reiterating how the hypervisor works to kind of obfuscate the resources that are being used. It only lets that virtual machine see the virtual resources. The smaller window in the lower part of the screen well, I guess I forgot to turn on my zoom in tool. But the smaller image in the lower part of the screen down here, that's the host resources. You can see it's 226 gigabytes out of 465 gigabytes that's being used on the host machine. And then in the background there, that's the virtual machine. It only has 9.6 gigabytes used out of 30 gigabytes. That's just showing you the obfuscation of the hypervisor on the virtual resources. VMware tools are installed to enhance the user experience, improve performance, and help manage the VM. We talked about VMware tools. You can look up documentation online to see how to install VMware tools. You can install them from the hypervisor, right-clicking on the virtual machine and going into the menu there. And it kind of sends some information through. And it is recommended for all virtual machines. We've already said this. I guess I kind of got my slides out of order here. Virtual machines allow rapid reconfiguration. And that's one of the things that I do in the module where we add Windows operating system to a VMware Workstation VM. We actually add another hard drive to an already existing virtual machine, and you can actually do it to a virtual machine while it's still running, which is really neat. You'll see that when we get there. But one of the great parts about virtual machines is they allow rapid reconfiguration. Since they're using virtualized resources, all you really have to do is just allocate some more resources. And for many of them, you can actually do it while it's still running. And since they're the resources on the host, you just allocate a little more to the virtual machine as long as you don't exceed what's in the host. And you can do it in just a couple minutes, instead of having to open up the host and take part and put parts in, switch parts out, and do a whole bunch of fiddling. So as far as that goes, it's really, really easy, really, really good. If you find that, my Windows installation's a little slow, this might benefit from a little boost in RAM. You can just right-click on the virtual machine in the hypervisor, go down to the settings, and then just bump up the memory a little bit. Change it from 2 gigabytes to 4 gigabytes, 6 gigabytes, 8 gigabytes, just as long as you have memory on the host machine. You can keep bumping that memory up. As long as you have resources available to virtualize. So you can do that quickly and easily without having to make a brand new virtual machine or anything like that. So there are automation options and other methods of improving operational efficiency available. And we might talk about some of those, later on as we go through our material in the live streams. But when we're talking about optimization, there are some processes that run on Windows that aren't necessary in a virtual environment. Like one of the things that would be quick and easy to remove that would be good for optimization is power management. You don't need power management features on a virtual machine because they don't apply to the virtual machine. All the power management stuff is happening on your host machine. Your virtual machine doesn't do any real power management. So you can take all of the power management processes and get rid of them. You can also disable a lot of the personalization features or remove or disable a lot of that kind of stuff. A lot of the fancy fonts, a lot of custom sounds. If you're just running something like an application server, or something just to do a little bit of testing that you're not going to use as a full operating system, you can get rid of a lot of the extra bulk that makes up the basic operating system. All that stuff, in the end, all that stuff does is take up disk space and CPU use and memory resources. So, get rid of wallpapers, get rid of screensavers, disable visual effects. You don't need those if you're not going to use it as a regular desktop operating system. Getting rid of them saves you processing, saves you memory resource. And when you're optimizing these machines, it's really helping you exponentially. Now, as a result of the concept of consolidation. You know, any little bit that you can save helps. So ideally what you want to do is you want to try to make your Windows installation or what have you as lean as possible so that you can, you know, have a very efficient, very quick virtual machine. And there is documentation out there on the web that kind of helps you, that provides you with some specifics on how to do this optimization process. And so that's the end of what I want to talk about today. So here's the stuff that we kind of talked about today. We talked about installing Windows into a virtual machine and how it's identical to installing Windows on a physical host or a physical server. We talked about VMware tools and how and what they are and how they're used. We talked about the inspection of system configuration. Those are those, in that way, those are those VMware specific drivers. So the device manager, the system configuration, when it says that the devices are created by VMware, we know that VMware is not a hardware manufacturer. So in that way, we know that it's a virtual machine. And then certain Windows processes and components can and should be eliminated from a virtual machine deployment as they waste resources and are not applicable to a virtual deployment. And some things to think about is, the steps to install Windows, into a VM, they can be kind of tedious. Making the VM, installing the Windows into the VM, all that kind of stuff. But it's necessary in order to be able to do it. Both the tools and the processes make this step in the creation of a functional virtual machine less and less mandatory, requiring less time than we've seen in the past, when a manual install was the norm. When we were installing stuff on just host machines over and over again instead of deployment onto virtual machines. So, we've there's really little reason that we have today to be concerned with whether an application is staged on a physical platform or a virtual one. Because everything in the end is kind of going to be the same with where we've gone in terms of technology. So again, that's all I have for you today. I just had that one final thought to kind of get out of my head. Make sure, if at all possible, come to the Advising Day, October 28th, 10:30 a.m. I'll post an announcement in Blackboard a little later in the week with some more specifics on that, room and all that kind of fun stuff. I'm going to turn the music back on, stay and answer questions in the chat for just a minute. But that's all I've got for today. Thank you for coming, and I hope to see you all next time. Thank you.
Light it up. I need counter stacks.